There are 23 names the Church refuses to speak. 23 sisters of faith vanished. No graves, no records, no farewells, just erased. And for over 160 years, St. Mary's Convent has stood quiet, as if the walls themselves were sworn to secrecy. But secrets rot, and some walls shall bleed. Before we open the first sealed page of this nightmare, I want to know, where are you hearing this from? Which city, which state, which country? Drop your location in the comments. Let us see who's listening, and who dares to keep going. Now, let's begin with the one document they never meant you to see. It was a restoration crew, not a historian, that discovered it. July 3rd, 2002. St. Mary's was undergoing renovations after decades of abandonment. Behind a bricked-up passage on the 3rd floor, they found a sealed cavity lined with dry straw and blood-stained parchment. 6 letters, one name repeated in all of them, Mother Catherine, and one word scratched into the wood panel beneath, Benedicta, blessed. But what does it mean to be blessed in a place that consumes its own? This is not just a story of missing persons. It is a system, cloaked in ritual, rooted in empire, engineered to silence. We've been taught to see nuns as gentle, selfless, pure. But purity, when weaponized, becomes control. And at St. Mary's, purity was the mask worn by something else entirely, something ancient, something hungry. The Vatican called it a clerical mix-up. But bishops don't spend millions erasing mix-ups. There's a reason these documents were buried. There's a reason none of the nuns were ever found. There's a reason the Church stopped answering questions after 2005. The story you're about to hear has never been told in full, not like this, and once you've heard it, something inside you won't go back to sleep. We begin in the autumn fog of 1854, as the carriage of Bishop William Quarter creaked through the pines of northern Wisconsin, rolling toward a looming Gothic mansion meant to be the beacon of Catholicism in the Protestant frontier. But the light it cast was cold, and it never stopped watching. The wheels of the bishop's carriage cracked against frost-hardened soil as the estate came into view. The trees surrounding it leaned inward, as though bracing themselves for what was to come. 3 towering wings of limestone stood silent, cold, indifferent, their pointed arches like mouths sealed shut in eternal witness. This was the future St. Mary's Convent, but the land beneath it had a past. The locals said no birds nested in the trees behind the chapel, not even crows. Children dared each other to run past the gates at dusk, and the old Ojibwe man who sold kindling by the roadside warned travelers not to sleep near the woods. The land remembers the blood, he said. It never forgets the screams. No one listened. Inside the carriage, Bishop William Quarter adjusted his cloak, oblivious to the whispers on the wind. With him were 3 women cloaked in black, their faces pale, lips murmuring quiet Latin prayers. At the center sat Mother Catherine, still, composed, watching the road with eyes the color of ice on slate. Her hands rested calmly on a leather-bound volume of the Rule of Saint Benedict. She had memorized it, every line, every punishment, every path to obedience. The estate had once belonged to a lumber baron whose daughter died mysteriously in 1847. Her death was ruled an accident, a fall from the East Tower, but her mother said she'd heard something dragging chains through the halls the night before. After that, the family never returned. The church bought the property for a fraction of its worth. The deed passed through hands swiftly, too swiftly. As the sisters disembarked, the chapel bells rang out across the frozen plains, though no one was yet inside to ring them. Sister Elizabeth's smile faltered. Sister Margaret clutched her cross tighter, but Mother Catherine did not flinch. "It is time," she said. "God prepares his vessels in silence." The ceremony was brief. The bishop's blessing echoed hollow in the chapel nave. But when the congregation filed out, local children claimed they saw a woman watching from the attic window, though no one had been assigned to the upper floors. That night the wind howled against the stone like 1,000 forgotten prayers, and a single candle burned in the east wing long past midnight. One of the younger nuns, Sister Agnes, would later write in her journal, "It feels like the house is listening." She was the first to disappear. In the first weeks, everything moved according to sacred order. The nuns rose before dawn, their breath visible in the freezing chapel air as they knelt on unyielding stone. 7 times a day the bell would toll, and each time they would return, barefoot, heads bowed, voices chanting in a language older than the trees outside. But beneath the rhythm, something else began to take root, a tension, a watching, a knowing. Mother Catherine's rule was absolute. She walked the halls without sound. Her steps seemed to glide, no creak, no breath, only the low rustle of her habit and the quiet click of rosary beads brushing the floor. Discipline, she said, was love made visible, and she loved them all, fiercely. She introduced punishments within the first month. Minor ones at first. Cold water poured over hands left idle during prayer, dull needles given for sloppy sewing, isolation for idle chatter. But then came the dried peas, scattered in piles for the sisters to kneel upon for hours at a time. Red welts blossomed on young knees like martyrs' roses. Sister Josephine fainted after one such penance. She was not given medical aid, only more prayers. Sister Mary Collins, the quiet one with shaking hands, noticed something strange. Each punishment was not just for discipline, but for transformation. The punished changed. They no longer smiled. They no longer asked questions. They simply obeyed. One evening, as snow curled in spirals outside the narrow dormitory windows, Sister Agnes whispered from her cot, "I heard a voice behind the chapel, under the floor. It said my name." Sister Bernardet clutched her hand. "You were dreaming." But Agnes shook her head. "It wasn't a dream. It knew things. About my childhood, about my father's farm, about the letter I never sent." The next morning, Sister Agnes was gone. Mother Catherine said she had been called to a new missa, but her belongings were still in the room, her worn prayer book, her family rosary, even her winter cloak, untouched on the hook. It had snowed all night. There were no footprints outside. And that evening during Vespers the bell rang once, a single, unnatural chime, not in the tower but beneath the floorboards. No one spoke of it. But Sister Margaret, pale and stiff, turned toward the altar and whispered something under her breath in Latin, not scripture, not prayer, an invocation. And the wind outside stopped. Instantly, the silence became a second skin. Not peace, not calm, but silence, deliberate, pressed, and cold. By the second winter, laughter had vanished from the halls. Smiles were brief and hollow. Eye contact became rare. The convent functioned, yes. The orphanage was clean, the infirmary well run, the prayers constant. But something was shifting. You could feel it in the walls, in the air, even in the way the younger nuns moved, like they were being watched not by God, but by something else. It was Sister Teresa Donovan who found the door. January 1856, a bitter week. The wind had shattered the chapel's stained glass window during morning prayers, and Sister Teresa was tasked with clearing the debris. As she cleaned the broken fragments near the choir wall, her fingers brushed against an indentation, not part of the stonework, but a seam in the plaster, a line, a doorframe. She returned that night with Sister Mary Collins, carrying a smuggled candle and a chisel. Behind the thin plaster was a small wooden door, no taller than a child, unmarked, unlocked. The air that spilled from behind it was not cold, it was warm, damp, as though it hadn't tasted the outside in decades. Inside, a narrow passage descending, and at the bottom, a chamber, no larger than a pantry, dirt floor, stone walls, a low altar, crudely built, stained, a wooden crucifix hung upside down. Scratches covered the stone, not symbols but tally marks, hundreds, maybe thousands, and in the far corner, a pile of tattered cloth. Habits, torn, faded, bloodied, Teresa stepped back, heart pounding. Mary turned to run, but behind them, a soft voice. "Why are you here?" They froze. It was Sister Margaret. Her eyes gleamed strangely in the candlelight. In her hand, a small satchel. Herbs, roots, bones, not animal. Human finger bones, polished, smooth. "You were not summoned," she said quietly. His room is not for prayer, it is for preparation." Then she blew out the candle. Darkness. Mary screamed. Teresa grabbed her and they stumbled back up the corridor, slamming the hidden door behind them. They said nothing that night, or the next, but Sister Teresa carved a small cross into her bedpost, a mark, in case she disappeared. 2 days later, Mother Catherine announced that Sister Mary Collins had been called to Detroit for a new mission. She left no farewell, no trunk, no cloak, only the faint scent of herbs on her bedsheets and the sound of footsteps behind the choir wall. You must understand something before we go further. Obedience, in its purest form, is not about duty, it's not about faith, it's about erasure. To obey completely is to vanish willingly. And that's what St. Mary's demanded. By the spring of 1856, the rules had changed. Quietly, almost imperceptibly. No official decree was read aloud, but the sisters felt it. They no longer referred to themselves by name, but only as sister and servant. Personal letters home were discouraged, then forbidden, then punished. The mail was redirected through Mother Catherine's office, and any sister who resisted found herself assigned to night watch, a new duty with no witnesses. No one knew what night watch entailed, only that those who returned from it looked altered. Eyes darker, shoulders rigid, voices hushed as though afraid of what might still be listening. Sister Teresa kept a journal hidden behind a loose brick in the cellar. Only 19 entries remain. The rest appear to have been ripped out by hand. One entry dated June 11th reads, "Last night, I saw Margaret in the garden after Compline. She was burying something beneath the rosemary. I asked what it was. She said it was necessary, that it had been cleansed. Her hands were red, not from dirt, from something thicker. When I told Sister Elizabeth, she looked away. 'We all do our part,' she whispered. 'The body must be purified.' The body? Whose body?" There was no answer. 1 week later, Teresa was summoned to night watch. She never returned. Mother Catherine told the sisters that Teresa had broken her vows, that she had fled in shame under the cover of darkness. "The Lord separates wheat from chaff," she said from the pulpit the next morning. "Rejoice when the impure are cast out." But Sister Bernadette, who'd once shared Teresa's duties in the infirmary, found something while cleaning the refectory pot. And try a shred of black cloth, torn, caught in the hinges of the locked basement hatch, a hatch no one was permitted to open. It wasn't there the day before, and scrawled in chalk on the inside of the pantry door, faint, nearly erased, was a phrase repeated 3 times in Latin, "Non ego, non ego, non ego. I am not, I am not, I am not." It was the last thing Teresa had ever written. The doctrine was working. The women weren't just disappearing, they were being erased from themselves. It wasn't just control, it was ritual, and rituals leave stains. By late 1856, the chapel had become something else, not a place of worship, but of offering. The prayers were still in Latin, but their tone had shifted. They were slower, heavier, less sung, more chanted. The syllables drawn out, unnatural, like words dragged from beneath the earth. Some nuns reported strange dreams, always beginning with bells tolling backward and ending with voices that weren't their own. And always, at the center, Mother Catherine. She stood taller than ever, eyes shining with purpose. She claimed that new orders were being issued from Rome, that what they were building at St. Mary's was not a convent, but a new order of sanctification. one that required total submission, body, blood, and soul. The old rules of Catholic humility had become weapons. Sister Margaret now held evening remedy sessions in the infirmary, herbs, tinctures, and bloodletting, not for illness, she claimed, for spiritual release, to cleanse what was clogging the divine channel. Those summoned emerged pale, trembling, and changed. One collapsed on the steps, another began weeping during lauds and never stopped. Sister Elizabeth, once kind and nurturing, had become hollow. She stopped visiting the orphans. She no longer smiled. Her eyes darted constantly. When Sister Helena accidentally dropped a chalice during communion preparation, Elizabeth didn't scold her. She simply whispered, "Now it knows your name," and walked away. The orphanage wing was closed the following week. No explanation. And then the voices started. It began in the walls, scratching, low murmurs, echoes in empty corridors, a child's laugh where no children were. One nun claimed she heard her own name being spoken behind the confession booth, but in her dead mother's voice. The church sent no inspectors, but one visito did arrive. Father Samuel Dorn, a Jesuit from Boston with academic interest in Catholic frontier expansion. He stayed 3 nights, took detailed notes, asked too many questions. On the morning of the 4th day, he was gone. The guest room untouched, his notebook missing. Only a single torn page remained, tucked inside a hymnal. This is not penance. This is not sacrifice. This is architecture. A system designed to hollow the mind and fill it with something ancient. That week, the bell rang 13 times, at midnight, and every nun awoke with a word on her tongue that she could not remember by dawn, but they all spoke it in their dreams. Winter returned to Wisconsin with a cruelty not seen in years. By November 1856, snow fell in endless silence, blanketing the pine forests and sealing St. Mary's from the world like a tomb in white lace. Roads became impassable, supply deliveries ceased. The outside world simply forgot. Inside, something else was happening. Feast days had taken on new meaning. No longer commemorations of saints and martyrs, they became rituals of transformation. On December 8th, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, the sisters were instructed to fast for 3 days, no food, no water, no speech. On the 3rd night, they gathered in the refectory. The long wooden table had been stripped bare, no candles, no bread, only a basin of dark liquid at the center, steaming gently. One by one, the sisters approached. Mother Catherine stood at the head, her arms outstretched, eyes closed, lips moving silently. Sister Margaret carried a small iron blade. Each nun knelt, each one was cut, a shallow slice across the palm, and with her bleeding hand, each dipped her fingers into the basin and marked her forehead. Cross, circle, triangle. Some trembled, some wept, some whispered scripture in panic, but none refused. Sister Evelyn, youngest among them, hesitated. Her hand shook, her breath hitched, but as Margaret reached for her wrist to assist, Evelyn recoiled. "No," she whispered. This is not of him." The room froze. Mother Catherine opened her eyes. The silence was thicker than snow. "You speak rebellion," she said, her voice low, unshaken. "And rebellion is possession." Evelyn was removed from the room. The next morning, her bed was gone, her name scratched off the registry, her possessions burned in the courtyard without explanation, her memory faded like smoke. But Sister Clare saw something that morning, just after sunrise, near the north garden, before the snow could fully fall again, a shape in the white, bare feet, drag marks, and then, abruptly, nothing. No footsteps returning, no sign of struggle, as if the earth had swallowed her whole. That night, Sister Clare carved the phrase, "No God in hunger," into the underside of her prayer bench. She was found 3 days later in the root cellar, her mouth filled with dirt, her tongue missing. Mother Catherine called it a tragic accident, a collapse from exhaustion. But the look on Margaret's face, calm, satisfied, said otherwise. This was not devotion. This was consumption. and the thing they were feeding was finally waking. The earth beneath St. Mary's was not soil, it was a vault. In the spring of 1857, during an attempt to install a new drainage system for the infirmary, a hired laborer named Josiah Meeker, a stoic, soft-spoken man from Sheboygan, arrived with a team of 3. They were to dig a trench around the east wing and lay new pipe to manage the flooding snowmelt. They lasted 2 days. On the morning of the 3rd, only Josiah remained. The other 3 had left in the night, without collecting wages, without taking tools. No explanation, just gone. Josiah stayed. But when the cook, a laywoman named Mrs. Dalton, brought him breakfast, she found him staring into a trench he'd been digging alone all night. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. He was pale, dirt-smeared, his hands raw. "I hit stone," he muttered, not looking up. Not bedrock, not foundation, something else, something smooth. Carved, deep down. Mrs. Dalton pressed, but he only shook his head and whispered, "It has writing on it, but it's not English, not Latin." That evening, Sister Margaret came to his quarters with tea. No one saw Josiah again. The next morning, the trench had been filled, perfectly, as though it had never been opened. The sisters were told the flooding had resolved. The pipes were divinely unblocked, according to Mother Catherine, who stood at the pulpit smiling for the first time in weeks. But something shifted after that day. The sisters began sleepwalking. 3 nuns were found standing in the garden before dawn, eyes open, mouths moving silently. When awakened, they remembered nothing, only that they'd dreamed of a tunnel made of teeth. The dream spread. A tunnel, always the same, lined with ivory, lit from within, and at the end, a door made of glass and ash. Each time the dream ended with the same voice, "You are almost ready." One sister, desperate to escape, tried to flee through the woods under the cover of darkness. She was found 12 hours later by a search party from the nearby village, barefoot, bleeding, her eyes missing. She had torn them out with her own hands. Carved into her forearm, the phrase, "We were never alone," in her own blood. The church would later claim she had been mentally unwell, but what they couldn't explain was how she spoke 6 languages fluently during her final hours. Languages no one at the convent had ever taught. Every convent rings its bells for prayer. Matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, vespers, compline. 7 sacred hours, 7 times to call the soul back to God. But by midsummer of 1857, a new bell began to ring at St. Mary's. Not from the tower, not from the chapel, from below. It happened first during Vespers. The sisters were in the nave, kneeling, chanting the Magnificat. As the final verse faded, a single low tone echoed up from beneath the altar. Not metallic, not struck, felt. It made the candles flicker. Mother Catherine paused mid-chant, eyes closed. Then she smiled. "It has begun," she whispered. After that, it became routine. Once a week, always during the final line of prayer, one tone, low, sustained, like the breath of something ancient exhaling beneath their feet. Sister Helena begged for clarity. "Mother, is it the wind?" But Margaret responded instead. "No wind hums in perfect pitch." The sisters began to dread Vespers. Many claimed to hear the bell in their dreams. Others said it followed them through the halls, low and soft, like a lullaby you were never meant to hear. And then they opened the floor. The excavation was done in silence. The altar was carefully lifted, the marble beneath it cracked with barely any force, as if waiting. Below, a staircase. Spiraling downward, only Mother Catherine, Sister Margaret, and 2 senior sisters were allowed to descend. They were gone for hours. When they returned, they said nothing. But that evening, every sister was given a new robe, identical in shape, but with a small change. The embroidered cross over the heart now had a single eye at its center. When asked what it meant, Catherine replied, "It is the eye that watches, the one that saw before Eden, the one that waits for return." Soon the seventh prayer was replaced by what they called the fifth bell. The sisters would gather in the refectory after dark. No candles, no words, just silence, waiting, until the tone returned, vibrating through the stone. And as it sounded, they would close their eyes and hum in unison. That was when Sister Miriam vanished. She had hesitated during the hum, opened her eyes, and in her journal, the last entry written in a hand shakier than before, she scribbled a single sentence over and over. "The bell is not a sound, it is a mouth, and it's calling something up." By autumn of 1857, the convent was unraveling, but silently, with dignity, as if decay itself had been trained in etiquette. The sisters no longer questioned missing names. They no longer spoke of dreams or bells or wounds. They simply adjusted. But Sister Genevieve, who'd transferred from Montreal only months prior, wasn't like the others. Her faith was sharp, new, still wet with the ink of scripture and idealism, and in her hunger to serve, she began cataloging the convent's architecture for diocesan records, dimensions, blueprints, room counts. That's how she found it. A door on the third floor in the north wing, where there should have been none. She was certain. She had walked that hallway dozens of times. Blank wall, nothing. But now, between the linen closet and the vestry, a tall wooden door, iron handle, no markings. She opened it. Inside, a narrow room lined with mirrors. 10, maybe 12, floor to ceiling. The room was lit from above by a stained glass skylight. Though no such window was visible from outside, the air was humid, and though her reflection appeared clearly in every mirror, something felt wrong. In each pane, her reflection was slightly different. In one, she was older, in another younger, in one, she wore a habit soaked in blood. And in the mirror at the far end, she wasn't there at all. Only the room, only the door. Behind her, she turned. The door was still open, the hallway, still visible. But as she stepped back into the corridor, she noticed something else. The floor was wrong. A tile pattern she didn't recognize. Candles burning low on the sconces. She hadn't lit them. And from the opposite end of the corridor, chanting, not Latin, something older. Sister Genevieve rushed to the stairs, down 2 flights, past the chapel, past the dining hall. She opened the main door. Outside, the same frozen trees. But the sky was red. Not sunset, not dawn. A blood hue that pulsed like a heartbeat. She closed the door. When she opened it again, it was night. Stars overhead, as if no time had passed. She never told anyone, but that evening, she placed a knife beneath her pillow, and in her diary she wrote, "I entered a room that didn't exist, and left through a door that hadn't opened. I think I walked through something that watches." She disappeared 5 days later. The room vanished too. No door, no mirrors, no skylight. But the dust on the floor remained disturbed, in the shape of bare feet, walking backward. It had always been about obedience, but now it was about inversion. At St. Mary's, doctrine was no longer read. It was rewritten, and not in books, in flesh. The sisters were no longer permitted to confess in the chapel. Confession now took place in a small side room beneath the stairs, behind a curtain of coarse wool. The penitent would kneel, the confessor would remain unseen, and the penance, always harsher than the sin, would be whispered not in absolution, but in instruction. "You are not forgiven. You are being reshaped." The phrase echoed across nights, across dreams, across breathless prayers. Crosses were inverted, subtly at first. The altar cloth embroidered with upside-down sigils. The crucifix in the dining hall removed altogether. In its place, a blank wooden panel with a single red thread nailed vertically down the center. When asked, Mother Catherine simply said, "God's silence is more instructive than his word." But it wasn't silence that crept through the convent. It was mimicry. Sister Ruth, known for her perfect recitations of scripture, began repeating verses, backwards. She claimed she couldn't stop, that her mouth moved on its own. The others mocked her, until she went mute for 3 weeks, her lips sealed shut, as if sewn from within. Then, without warning, she screamed awake during lauds, clawing at her throat, speaking in a language no one understood, not even Sister Margaret, who claimed to know 5 ancient dialects, and written in blood on the inside of her bed sheets. It is learning to speak through us. Sister Ruth was gone the next day. Transferred, again. But her Bible, the one she carried everywhere, was found half buried in the convent's herb garden. Every page blackened with ink, except the last. A single sentence remained untouched. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the it was torn. No end. That same week, the children's wing, once the orphanage, was sealed permanently. No reason, no announcement, just boarded shut. Sister Elizabeth was never seen entering it again, but late one night, a village boy delivering firewood swore he heard crying from inside. Not one child, dozens, and then laughter. Not innocent, not human. Something was speaking through the walls now, and every time a nun disappeared, the echoes grew louder. They said the archives were sealed, that only the bishop's office held the keys, that nothing at St. Mary's ever happened without ecclesiastical approval. But someone lied. In early winter of 1857, Sister Miriam, the convent's quietest and most studious sister, was tasked with reorganizing the upper library. The third-floor stacks hadn't been touched in years. Dust blanketed every volume. Many were water-damaged, unreadable. But behind a row of mold-eaten hymnals, she found a box, unmarked, leather-bound, locked with rusted iron clasps. She brought it to Sister Margaret for inspection. Margaret's face drained of color. She took the box without a word. That evening, Sister Miriam was seen scrubbing the chapel floor for 7 straight hours, blood mixed with ash coating the tiles. The next morning, the book was gone, and Miriam had been reassigned to penance confinement. She was never seen again. But here's what they didn't expect. Miriam had written notes, pages of them, tucked between other books, hidden behind statues, folded beneath altar cloths. One was found by Sister Clare, hidden inside a copy of City of God by St. Augustine. The page read, "It is not a Bible, it is not a book, it's a manual. Rituals, names, symbols, instructions. Not to summon something, to feed it. Some of the ink is not ink. It smells metallic. I think it's from the missing sisters. The last chapter has no words, only drawings, circles, eyes, mouths. One of them looks like the floor plan of this convent, but upside down. And then, in frantic slashes, this place is not on holy ground. It's a lid, and something underneath it is pushing to open." The drawing that followed was crude, a spiral staircase surrounded by 13 figures in black. At the center, a single flame emerging from what appeared to be a pulsing womb made of stone and ribs. The letters beneath it were not Latin, not Greek. But Sister Clare recognized one of the characters. It matched the strange rune carved on the inside of the confessional door that had been quietly removed 2 weeks earlier. When she brought the page to Mother Catherine, she was not reprimanded. She was embraced. "Thank you, dear," Catherine said softly. "You are ready." Clare was last seen the next night, descending into the sub-chapel during the 5th bell. The next day, her bed was gone. But in its place, arranged carefully on the pillow, were 7 white feathers and a torn scrap of black fabric with a single word, "Belong." There was a room no one spoke of. It had no name, no sign, no entry in the convent's plans, and yet every sister knew where it was. deep beneath the infirmary, past the stone stair that curved tighter with every step, through a corridor where even the bravest candles refused to hold flame. At the end, a wooden door, heavy, warped, breathing. They called it, only in whispers, the saint's room. Mother Catherine said it was sacred, but those who returned from it came back, changed, eyes hollow, mouths closed. Forever. Not in vow, but in absence. They were the ones who ascended, who completed the path. They no longer spoke, no longer wept. They moved slowly, as if submerged in water. They smiled always, faint, blissful smiles. The other sisters called them the mouthless saints. They were kept apart, not punished, not shamed, honored, given their own wing, their own corridor, lit by red oil lamps that never went out. Sister Anna saw one late one night, standing at the foot of her bed, tall, still, smiling, her lips sewn shut with golden thread. Anna screamed, but the mouthless sister placed a finger gently over her own lips, and Anna fell instantly unconscious. She awoke 3 days later in the infirmary, unable to speak. Not from fear. Her tongue was gone. Mother Catherine told the community it was stigmata, divine silence gifted to the faithful. But Sister Helena, brave and burning with doubt, broke protocol. She snuck into the red-lamped wing. What she found was not holiness, it was preservation. Rows of cots, sisters strapped down with braided rosaries, mouths sealed with wax and thread. Some moved, some didn't. One was humming, not aloud but through her nose, a tune so low it vibrated the walls. And on a crude altar at the far end, teeth, dozens, sorted into piles by size. Helena backed away, heart thundering. But behind her, a voice. "Catherine, you should not be here." "I had to see," Helena began, but her throat tightened, her words collapsed. Catherine stepped forward, calm as still water. "The tongue is the serpent of doubt, the eyes, the windows of rebellion. To remove them is not cruelty." She lifted Helena's chin. "It is evolution." Helena vanished that night. In her place, a new, mouthless saint stood in the refectory the next morning, smiling, silent, watching. And the other sisters began to wonder, if this was sainthood, why did it feel so much like death? For years, the East Tower of St. Mary's had been closed. Structural instability, they said, too dangerous to climb. But the villagers remembered stories. Before it was a convent, the estate's original owner, lumber magnate Franklin Wexler, had built that tower for his daughter Lillian. She loved bells, carved them, drew them, kept books about their meaning in different cultures. Some say she believed they could bind voices, or free them. She died up there in 1847. Fell, they said. But no one ever explained how her body was found inside the bell itself, folded unnaturally, her mouth packed with ashes and rosemary. The church sealed the tower after purchasing the property. But in the winter of 1858, the bell rang again, only once. But it wasn't a toll. It was a scream. And those who heard it felt something behind their eyes crack open. One orphan boy began to convulse. A sister fainted. 2 others clawed at their ears, bleeding. Mother Catherine claimed it was a freak echo, a loosened stone, a wind anomaly. But Sister Philomena wasn't convinced. She had heard words inside the sound, a message, not spoken but injected, directly into her. That night, she found herself drawn to the East Tower. The hallway leading to it, once blocked with furniture and boards, was now open, unlocked. No guards, no warnings, almost welcoming. She climbed the spiral staircase, candle trembling in her hand. The air grew colder, not with winter, but with memory. At the top, she found the great bell, green with age, suspended in iron braces, and beneath it, a body, kneeling, head bowed, face hidden. It wore a tattered habit, one not issued to any current sister. Its hands were clasped in prayer, and from beneath the veil came the softest whisper, not in Latin, not English, but Philomena understood it anyway. She never left. She became the bell. The kneeling figure turned. Where there should have been a face, there was only polished brass, etched with symbols, circles inside mouths, eyes drawn in triplicate, and at the center, a keyhole. The candle blew out. Philomena ran. The next morning she could no longer speak, not out of fear. Her tongue had turned black, hardened, metal, and when Sister Margaret examined her in the infirmary, she only said, "She's been chosen." The bell wants to ring again. That week, the East Tower rang 13 times. No one touched the ropes. No one was in the tower. But from that day on, when the bell rang, it echoed beneath the skin. The Church requires 3 vows: poverty, chastity, obedience. But at St. Mary's, there was a 4th. A vow no one signed. No ceremony, no ink, no parchment. Only a moment, a look from Mother Catherine, a quiet summons after Compline, a knock at the cell door after midnight, and the sister would return changed, distant, hollow, devoted beyond understanding. Sister Annalisa called it the vow of forgetting. She spoke the phrase once, only once, during her final conversation with Sister Magdalena in the root cellar where they had been sent to sort potatoes. It was cold, damp, lit by a single swinging lantern. Annalisa's eyes were sunken, her fingers bruised from prayer disciplines, but her voice was sharp. "I forgot my mother's name yesterday," she said, barely above a whisper. "Just gone, like it never lived in me." Magdalena stopped working. "I tried to remember the farm, the pond, the little dog that used to sleep by the stove, gone. I tried to picture his face. Nothing, just static." She turned, eyes wide with a kind of terrified awe. "But I can name all 13 of the mouthless saints, and I can draw the symbol they carved on my chest during the 5th bell." She lifted her tunic just slightly, a spiral, carved shallow, bleeding. Magdalena stepped back. "You should tell someone." "No," Annalisa said. "I did. I told Sister Elizabeth." She smiled and said, "The less you carry, the closer you rise." Then she gave me tea and told me to lie down, and when I woke, her hands trembled. I couldn't remember my own voice. That night, Magdalena wrote down her entire family tree in the margins of her Bible, terrified she'd forget them next. By morning, Annalisa was gone. Her bed stripped, her things removed, her name scrubbed from the dormitory list, but Magdalena found something tucked beneath her own cot. A rosary, black string, no crew, suffix. Just a small iron key, and a note in Annalisa's handwriting. "There's a door behind the washing basin in the abandoned wing. It leads downward, past memory, past self. Don't open it unless you're ready to die before you die." That day, Magdalena looked in the mirror and realized she no longer recognized her own handwriting. And at evening prayer, the sisters chanted a line not found in any scripture. "Blessed are the broken minds, for they shall be made blank." For months, the orphanage wing had remained sealed. No laughter, no footsteps, just silence behind boarded doors and curt explanations. Mother Catherine claimed the children had been relocated to a better facility in Milwaukee. No records, no visitors, no proof. But one night in December 1858, a traveling merchant named Alphonse Leclerc took shelter near the convent after his horse collapsed on the frozen road. He was granted food and warmth, but not lodging. He was told by Sister Margaret that the convent did not host men overnight. Respecting custom, he pitched a tent just beyond the tree line and bedded down. At 3:17 a.m., he was awoken by a sound no man forgets. Children, weeping, but not just weeping, whispering. He followed the sound to the edge of the property and saw light, faint, greenish, leaking from the cracks of the orphanage wing. He approached. One of the boards had come loose from a window. He peered in. What he saw sent him fleeing barefoot through the snow until he collapsed in the village church at sunrise. He was half mad, frostbitten, unable to speak coherently for hours. When he finally did, he described a garden growing inside the orphanage, but not of vegetables, of eyes. Hundreds of them, open, blinking, suspended on stalks of pale white flesh like flowers. Children's voices humming lullabies in perfect harmony, and above them all, on the far wall, written in something thick and dark, "The eye that watches must never close." He said one of the eyes looked directly at him, and it smiled. The church dismissed his account, called him delusional, a victim of exposure. But 3 days later, Sister Magdalena discovered muddy footprints in the convent corridor, small ones, bare, leading from the orphanage wing to the vestibule, then vanishing. She told Sister Elizabeth. Elizabeth said nothing, just placed her hand on Magdalena's shoulder and whispered, "Sometimes what is buried grows stronger." That night, during the 5th bell, Magdalena was assigned to sweep the vestibule. She found something wedged in the crack of the stone tiles, a human molar, too small to be an adult's, still bloody, still warm. She didn't scream. She couldn't, because in the reflection of the chapel's stained glass window, she saw a child behind her, with no eyes, just skin, pulled tight and smooth where a face should be. And in her hand, not a doll, not a toy, a nun's habit, torn. There was a phrase the sisters whispered when they thought no one could hear. "Beware the veil. When it turns red, it's your turn." No one knew when the tradition began. At first, veils were black, as expected. Standard habit, standard vows. But one morning, Sister Mariana entered the chapel wearing a crimson veil. She said nothing, offered no explanation. When asked, Mother Catherine simply replied, "She has crossed the threshold. She serves where others cannot." From then on, one by one, the red veils began to appear. Always unannounced, always worn by sisters who had recently returned from night watch or disappeared for days without record. These women did not speak much. Their eyes were off, fixed, but not vacant, too focused, as if they were listening to something inside you. The red veils never sat during meals. They never blinked during prayer. They never wept. And at night, some sisters heard them whispering from behind the dormitory walls, not words, but patterns, pulses, like chanting without voice, breath held in rhythm with something subterranean. Then came the ritual. Once a month, the refectory was emptied. Only red-veiled sisters and Mother Catherine remained. Doors were bolted, candles extinguished. No sounds, only silence, and humming from beneath the floorboards. Sister Magdalena made the mistake of watching. She found a loose board above the refectory and waited. What she saw nearly broke her. 12 sisters, seated in a circle, red veils down to their waists. In the center, a figure, unclothed, pale, scarred, not dead, not alive. Its limbs were bound with rosaries turned inside out. And one by one the veiled sisters pressed their foreheads to its chest, whispered something unintelligible, and bled from the eyes. At the end, Mother Catherine placed her hand on the figure's heart, and it began to beat. Magdalena recoiled. The floor beneath her groaned. She fled before she could be seen, but the next morning her own veil had changed. Red, hung carefully at the foot of her bed. She tried to burn it, but the fabric wouldn't catch flame. Later that day, her tongue began to split, not torn, not wounded, but splitting perfectly down the middle, as if guided. No pain, only a whisper in her ear. "Now you may speak in both directions." And that evening, during the 5th bell, Magdalena began to sing backwards. The others joined her. They never broke eye contact, and the humming below the floor, it hummed back. Some truths don't belong in words, they live in bone, in teeth, in reflection. The confessional at St. Mary's had always been simple: wood, 2 chambers, a veil between priest and penitent, forgiveness offered in hushed tones, sins swallowed by the dark. But in the winter of 1859, the confessional changed. It began with a sound, a slow, wet crack during Compline. Sister Justine heard it while sweeping the vestibule. She assumed it was frost splitting the old beams. But the next morning, something was different. The veil was gone. In its place, a polished mirror, nailed where the separation screen once hung. The kind of mirror that didn't reflect entirely true. The kind of mirror that watched back. Sister Justine reported it to Mother Catherine. Catherine only smiled. The mirror sees the soul better than any priest. From now on, confession is made to the self. From that day forward, each sister was required to kneel before the mirror once a week. No priest, no listener, just the mirror. And what they saw was not always themselves. Sister Helena saw her reflection blink before she did. Sister Martha saw bruises on her arms in the glass that didn't exist on her body, not yet. Sister Judith claimed her reflection smiled when she did not. And Sister Lillian, the newest novice, fled from the booth screaming. "It had no eyes," she cried, "no mouth, but it spoke." That night, her hands began bleeding from the palms, in perfect ovals like stigmata, except with teeth marks. Within days, Lillian was gone. Her mirror image remained. During evening inspection, Sister Elizabeth entered the confessional alone. What happened in that booth was never written down, but when she emerged, her skin was pale as parchment, her veil soaked through, and on the wall above the confessional, written in something dark and sticky, "It knows who you pretend to be." After that, the mirror was no longer optional. Each sister had to confess before it, or face spiritual expulsion. More and more began to change, not all at once, subtle things. One sister no longer cast a shadow. Another left no footprints in snow. One hummed constantly, but her mouth never moved. And the mirror? It began to crack, from the inside. Veins of black splitting outward like a spider's web. Each night, the fractures grew, and behind them, something waited. Not a face, not a form, just an outline. Watching, waiting for one more sister to step inside and not return. In February of 1859, during a sudden thaw, Sister Serafina was assigned to organize the convent's forgotten records, ancient files, family registers, and priestly correspondence sent from Boston decades prior. The storage room was beneath the bell tower, behind 3 locked doors. No one had been inside for years. The dust was thick, the air heavy with mildew and something else, iron and rot. She worked in silence, sorting yellowed parchment and water-damaged scrolls until she found it. A leather-bound book with no title. The spine bore only a single brand, an eye pierced by a nail. Inside were names, hundreds, but not of priests. Women, young women. Each entry listed a name, a birthplace, a date of entry into St. Mary's, and, most disturbingly, a symbol beside each name. Not crosses, not saint sigils, but spirals, inverted trees, mouths with no teeth. Next to some names, the word "opened" was written in red. Next to others, "sealed." Sister Serafina flipped through faster, breath quickening. She recognized names: Agnes O'Connor, Bernadette Walsh, Mary Collins, Teresa Donovan. All opened, all vanished. At the back of the book, folded between 2 torn pages, was a map, hand-drawn, faint. It wasn't of Wisconsin. Not as we know it. It showed St. Mary's at the center, marked by a black flame. From it radiated paths, like a spider's web, reaching outward to other locations. Orphanages, monasteries, boarding schools, all with notations, dates, and red ink. At the bottom corner, in trembling script, "We were not the first gate, only the most successful. The voice beneath must rise through many mouths." Serafina staggered back, heart hammering. She rushed to find Sister Elizabeth, show her, prove what she had seen. But when they returned, the room was empty. The shelves cleared, the book gone, and painted on the far wall, in what low, ochre like dried blood, was a shape, a veined spiral made of interlocking human spines. Elizabeth said nothing, just closed the door and whispered, "Some knowledge is a virus. You've already caught it." That night, Serafina awoke screaming, not from a dream, from the pain of something being carved into her back. The other sisters rushed to her cell, but she was alone, her sheets soaked through and etched into her spine in perfectly clean script. "You are now a page in the book." She was never seen again. But days later, a new entry appeared in the convent's official registry. Name, Serafina M. Status, sealed. Location, below. March 12, 1859. It began like any other day at St. Mary's. But by nightfall, no one had a name. Not one. The sisters awoke that morning unable to recall who they were. Not just the missing, even those untouched by the rituals. They could remember prayers, chores, scriptures. But not themselves, not the place they were born, not the parents who raised them, not even the names they'd taken in the order. Only silence in their minds where memory once lived. Mother Catherine called it the grace of the unmade. She gathered the remaining sisters in the chapel, her voice calm, her hands folded with surgical stillness. "The Lord has peeled back the illusion of self. Your burden is lifted. You no longer carry the lie of I." And then she made a demand. "Write down what little you still remember. It will be offered to him." A long wooden table was placed beneath the nave. Sheets of parchment, bottles of red ink. One by one, the sisters approached and wrote their final fragments of identity, bits of dreams, faded places, songs half remembered from childhood. Sister Joanna's page simply read, "A mother's hand, a song about rivers, a dog named Moss." Sister Celine wrote, "I once feared thunder. Now I pray it finds me." When the last page was filled, Catherine gathered the papers, folded them into tight squares, and placed them into a large iron basin beside the altar. She lit the flame herself. The fire turned black, thick, sweet-smelling, and from the basin, as the smoke spiraled upward, came the unmistakable sound of breathing, slow, deep, hungry. Every sister knelt, eyes closed, foreheads pressed to the floor. The chapel was silent for 10 full minutes. Then came the sound of footsteps, not shod in leather, not barefoot, wet, soft slapping sounds, like something dragging itself across stone. No one looked up. No one dared. The breathing stopped. The steps stopped. And then, in a voice like stone grinding through silk, it spoke, "You are nearly ready, but one still remembers." Silence. Then the flame snapped out, the breathing ceased, and Mother Catherine stood, her voice trembling for the first time. "Find her, before it does." The sisters scattered through the convent, room by room, bed by bed, but no one admitted to remembering, because the one who did had already begun to write down what it wanted. Not with ink, with her own blood. Etched into the walls of the old laundry hall, "My name is still mine, but it's trying to take it," and beneath it, in small print, over and over, "Don't say your name, it hears names." Deep in the west wing of St. Mary's, above the disused infirmary and behind a rusted grate, sat a room no one remembered building. It had no label. Its key was not on any ring, and yet the door was always unlocked. Inside, a single chair, a writing desk, and a large round clock mounted on the far wall. But the clock had no hands, only numbers, etched deep, wrong, out of order, and where the hands should have been, a black circle, smooth, glossy, like polished obsidian, like an eye. Sister Marguerite was the first to sit in the chair. She had been sleepwalking again, except this time she'd awoken mid-step, her hand on the doorknob, her bare feet bleeding from the walk through the splintered hall. She told no one, just stepped inside. The room was quiet, heavy, breathing. She sat. The moment she did, the door closed behind her. Not slammed. Closed like a thought, soft, certain, final. And the clock began to whisper, not with voice, with memories, not hers, others. A girl drowned in a baptismal font, a priest's spine snapping backward in the confessional, a child locked in a trunk for days until the crying stopped. Marguerite wept, but she could not look away from the black circle. In it, she saw not her reflection, but versions of herself, as a child, as an old woman, as a mother, though she had never borne children, as a corpse lying in the convent garden with lilies in her mouth. And then she saw something else, the convent, burning, every window a screaming mouth, every bell a laugh. She stood, tried to run, but the door would not open. Not until the circle blinked. Then, silence. She woke in her bed, drenched in sweat, barefoot, her hands clutching something she didn't recognize, a scrap of parchment. Not paper, skin. Etched into it a perfect map of the convent, but with a 13th floor, one that didn't exist. A spiral stair, a chamber labeled only the seat. She tried to show Mother Catherine, but when she reached into her pocket, the skin was gone. In its place, a handful of ash. Later that week, a new clock was mounted in the chapel vestibule. It had no hands, only a single eye, watching. And beneath it, carved in gold, "He who forgets time is ready to remember what came before it." That night, the bell rang backwards, and the moon turned black. It started with Sister Nama. During morning prayers, she collapsed without warning, striking the stone floor with a sound so sharp it silenced the entire nave. She bled from her nose, her ears, but not her eyes. Her eyes were moving, not her pupils, the whole orb, turning, spinning, slowly, as if something inside her was watching from behind. They carried her to the infirmary. Sister Margaret tended to her, alone. No one else was allowed near. By sundown, Nama was back on her feet, smiling, speaking in perfect, unbroken Latin, a language she had never studied. But she didn't call anyone by their name. Instead, she began referring to the sisters by symbols. You, the open vein. You, the voice without a mouth. You, the one who will shatter. The others tried to ignore her, until she began drawing, in chalk, in ash, in her own blood. Spirals. Not the soft kind, not symbolic. These were mathematical, intricate, precise, and each one mapped to a part of the convent. Walls where there shouldn't be walls. Rooms that didn't exist until she drew them, and then they appeared. One spiral led to a second kitchen no one remembered, another behind the altar to a staircase descending beneath the known basement. Mother Catherine watched all of this calmly, with satisfaction. "We are being reshaped," she said. "These are not hallucinations, they are architecture. We are becoming what we were always meant to be." But Sister Miriam resisted. She began refusing to walk near the spiral markings, covered the one drawn in her prayer cell with sheets, refused to sleep. On the 4th night, she vomited black bile. On the 5th, she scratched her entire forearm down to the bone, screaming, "It's beneath the skin. The spiral is in me now." She was sedated, but not by medicine, by scripture, inverted, chanted backwards by 3 red-veiled sisters, while Margaret held her mouth shut. When she awoke, the spiral had stopped, but so had her heart. For 7 minutes, then, suddenly, it beat again, but differently. Her pulse followed the pattern of the spiral, increasing, decreasing, doubling back, looping, not human. After that she only spoke in pairs, every sentence a mirror. We are within we are. The eye opens when the name is gone. Gone is the name when the eye opens. She had no memory of who she was, but she remembered every spiral, and when the bell rang that night, so did she. From her mouth, a perfect imitation of the convent bell, pitch for pitch, tone for tone. It echoed for 13 minutes, and when it stopped, every door in St. Mary's unlocked, on its own. March 23, 1859. Every door in St. Mary's Convent, from the chapel to the latrines, from the orphanage wing to the sealed archives, opened, together. No one touched them, no key turned. They simply unlatched. A soft exhale echoed through the halls, as if the entire building had taken one long breath inward, and then held it. Sister Miriam, the one who had died and risen, stood motionless in the chapel, her head tilted back, her mouth open wide, as if drinking something invisible. From her lips, a single word emerged. Welcome. What followed was not chaos. It was worse. Acceptance. The sisters moved through the convent like sleepwalkers, drifting from room to room, eyes wide, hands clasped, smiling as if called to supper. Some disrobed, some bled from the ears quietly. None screamed, except for one, Sister Rachel. She ran, tore her veil, cut her habit to shreds just to escape its weight. She burst from the chapel and fled down the corridor, only to find it longer than before, stretching, breathing, walls pulsing like lungs. She took a stairway she didn't recognize, one that spiraled downward, stone by stone, deeper into the convent's unseen belly. She found herself in a corridor lined with mirrors, but none showed her reflection. They showed versions, alternate paths. Her as a wife, as a child, as a corpse. In some she wore the red veil. In others she knelt before something massive and formless, wrapped in linen like a wound that had never closed. She ran, came to a door of black wood. On it, a plaque, etched in Latin, nulla via post hoc, no way back. She opened it, and saw a room filled with hands. Thousands, growing from the walls, ceiling, even the floor, reaching, grasping, not to pull her in, to pray. All palms faced her, as if she were the altar, as if she was being worshipped. She fled back the way she came, the door closing silently behind her. But when she returned to the chapel, it had changed. Everyone was gone. Pews empty, candles melted into stone, the crucifix gone, replaced by a mirror, floor to ceiling. In its glass, she did not see herself. She saw the other sisters standing in a circle around her, staring at her reflection, mouthing her name over and over. She clutched her chest. Her heart had stopped. She never collapsed. She never died. She simply slipped out of time. That evening, a new door appeared in the hallway beside the laundry. Unlabeled, unnumbered. Inside, just a chair. And on the wall, Sister Rachel's name, etched backwards. On April 1st, 1859, a man arrived at St. Mary's. He wore a crisp black cassock, silver-rimmed glasses, a Vatican seal pinned to his collar. Father Adrian Kavanaugh. He carried credentials from the Diocese of Milwaukee sent allegedly to investigate unusual administrative silence from the convent. For nearly 6 months, the bishop had received no correspondence, no requests, no ledgers, only silence. Kavanaugh's presence was an anomaly. St. Mary's had long learned how to hide. But now someone was knocking. Mother Catherine greeted him with grace, her voice soft, her smile flawless. "Of course, Father. You are welcome. Stay as long as you wish." He stayed 4 nights. He should have left on the 1st. Father Kavanaugh was meticulous, kept a leather journal on his hip at all times, filled it with observations. By the second evening, he had already noticed the identical gait of every sister, no variance in stride, no limp, no fatigue. The perfect silence between prayers, so absolute it rang in the ears. The absence of children. Not one sound from the orphanage. Not a single soul seen entering or exiting that wing. The mirrors, too many for a convent. Dozens. In stairwells, beneath crucifixes. Even in the refectory, where nuns avoided their own reflections like poison. He recorded one line with trembling script. "They do not look at me. They look through me." On the third night, he attempted to question Sister Margaret about the missing registry pages. She answered with a smile. The names were given. The names were taken back. When he asked for burial records, she paused. "We do not bury. We burn." That night, he awoke choking. Smoke filled his room, yet no fire could be found. Just a faint gray veil hanging over his bed, folded neatly, glowing with embers that didn't consume it. Pinned to the veil, a note. Not written, etched. "You should not have come. But now that you're here, one of us must leave." He packed at dawn. But the main gate would not open. The path he'd arrived on was gone. In its place, dense trees, gnarled, ancient, and on each trunk, freshly carved, a spiral. No two were alike. He sprinted to the chapel, demanding an escort, but found it empty. Only the pews, and the pulpit, and on it, his own journal, open to a page he didn't remember writing. April 4th. I have forgotten my name. The sisters are kind. They say I will make a fine red veil. He dropped the book. It closed on its own. From the rafters above, the bell chimed once. Deep, low, final. That night, a new sister was introduced to the dormitory. Tall, glasses, eyes dull with fog, veil red as blood. The others did not greet him. They simply nodded and whispered he chose to stay. He wore the ash. He opened the door from the other side. Somehow, letters began to arrive again, not sent by post, not carried by hand, just appearing, on beds, in shoes, folded beneath plates in the refectory, even sewn into habits, discovered only when the red thread came loose. Always the same parchment, always the same ink, black that shimmered red under candlelight, always written in a hand no one recognized, but that every sister swore was their own. They weren't letters of comfort. They were warnings. But from who? The first one read, "They don't need you to die. They need you empty." The second, "Your mouth will lie, your bones will obey, but your dreams will remember, until they come for them too." More began to appear, faster than the sisters could burn them. One left on Sister Magdalena's pillow said, "Run." And beneath that in smaller script, "But not through the north gate. It's no longer a gate." One letter was found nailed to the inside of the bell tower. No one admitted placing it. It read, "She is not Catherine. She is what wore Catherine when the first girl went missing." Another appeared on the pulpit one morning. Sister Elizabeth tried to conceal it, but the altar candles flared as she touched it. The message burned itself into the wood. "He will rise in the hollow of their prayers. Stop, speak, remember who you were, before you are rewritten." For the first time in months, the sisters hesitated during the fifth bell. No humming, no chanting, just silence, and the creaking of wood from every corridor, as if the convent itself were listening. Mother Catherine summoned them that evening. Her tone, once measured, now trembled with restrained fury. "There are forces at work here," she said, "but not all are divine. Some among you resist, hide, write. They fear what is coming, but it is not coming. It is already here." She held up a letter, crumpled, smudged, wet wit, what looked like tears. This is not rebellion, this is rot. She opened the chapel's great book of names and tore out 7 pages. 7 sisters, gone, banished, sealed, offered, no one knew. But that night, Sister Helena found a new letter beneath her prayer mat. Written in blood, "They burned your name, but we hid it. Say it twice in the mirror during the bell, and you'll wake up." She did as it instructed, knelt before the mirror, whispered her name once, then again. The reflection smiled, not hers, and said, "Too late. We already gave it away." The mirror shattered, and Helena's mouth opened, but no sound came out, only smoke. It was Sister Elodia who first heard it. During matins, while others chanted the divine office, she heard something else, low, deep, behind the wall of the chapel's southern transept. A voice, but not from outside, from inside the stone. At first she thought it was her imagination, a dream clinging too tightly. But as the chants rose, so did the voice, beneath them, a language no one had taught. Yet every syllable filled her chest with dread and familiarity, like hearing your own name spoken by a mouth that was never meant to form it. She stopped chanting, looked around. No one else reacted, except Margaret. Across the aisle she smiled. That night, Elodia returned to the transept, alone, candles dim, wind pressing against the stained glass. She pressed her ear to the stone and heard it again, not words, names, spoken slowly, intimately, one after another, names of sisters long gone, names erased, names burned, each name followed by a sound like stone grinding open, like breath being pulled into a mouth too deep to see. Then she heard her own, Elodia, whispered like a kiss against her skull. She staggered back, ran, but her name kept echoing, not in the air, in her blood. That night she did not sleep, because the voice kept whispering from her bones. By morning, Elodia was different. Her steps no longer echoed in the halls. Her reflection no longer blinked with her. She recited prayers in reverse, without error, without pause. And during the 5th bell, she stood and began to speak, not in Latin, not in English, but in the language of the stone. The floor beneath her cracked, hairline fissures, perfect circles, spirals crawling outward from her bare feet. The other sisters screamed, ran. Mother Catherine did not stop her. She knelt, smiling, arms raised. "The foundation speaks," she cried. "We are finally heard." The chapel trembled, candles went out, the crucifix fell from the wall and shattered, and from beneath the floor, beneath the altar, came a breath, not air, not wind, a thought, so heavy it bent light. The floor split open. Elodia fell through, never made a sound. Only her veil remained. It turned to ash in seconds. The spiral on the chapel floor remains. No one cleans it. They call it the mouth print. And sometimes when alone in the chapel, a sister will swear she hears her own name whispered from below, even if she's never spoken it aloud. There was one left who resisted fully. Sister Benedicta. She was older than the others, nearly 50, strong hands, firmer faith. She'd served in 3 convents before St. Mary's, had buried 2 fellow sisters, had carried children from plague-ridden orphanages in the East. She had seen darkness, but never like this, and somehow she remembered it all. Every disappearance, every spiral, every veil, every scream that didn't come from a mouth. She began to write, pages hidden under floorboards, behind icons, inside hymnals, anywhere she thought it might survive longer than she would. She copied every symbol she saw, mapped the spiral's growth beneath the chapel, transcribed the whisperings of the mouthless saints during sleep. And worst of all, she began to remember who the other sisters used to be. Not just names, stories. Laughter in the garden, jokes told over weak tea, tears shared before vows. She kept them alive in ink, refusing to let them be unmade. Until the day the mirrors stopped reflecting her. Every surface, blank. Every pane of glass, fogged. Only the sisters in red veils could see her, and they began to follow, silently, 2 steps behind, no matter where she went. She cornered Sister Elizabeth in the old laundry and demanded answers. Elizabeth only whispered, "You remember too much, and the convent does not permit archives, only altars." That night, Benedicta returned to her journal. Every page was blank, even the ink in her quill, gone. The candle extinguished itself. The walls pulsed, and the bell began to ring. But not just the 5th bell. All of them, 7, at once, layered, discordant, deafening. Every hour struck at once, and over the cacophony, a voice inside her skull. "Say your name, Benedicta. Say it aloud, and give it back." She screamed it, defiant. "Benedicta!" The bells stopped instantly, writhing, frozen. Then, a whisper from every crack in the room. Wrong. The floor collapsed beneath her. She awoke in the orchard, naked, shivering, veil gone, memory intact, and carved into her chest with perfect symmetry. She who refused the unnaming, she ran. Through the snow, through the woods, for 3 days, until a traveling priest found her curled beneath a statue of Saint Dymphna 40 miles away. When asked who she was, she sobbed and said, "I used to be Benedicta, but now I'm a page they couldn't burn." She died that night in a church infirmary. In her hand, a sliver of mirror, etched with spirals, and when the sisters at St. Mary's counted their number the next day, they still counted 23, even though they only remembered 22. There had always been 12 saints, 12 sisters buried behind veils, 12 names whispered in prayers never written down, 12 habits sealed in glass at the base of the chapel's apse, on display like relics. But in the spring of 1859, a 13th appeared. No one saw who placed it there. The glass wasn't cracked. The case wasn't unlocked. It was just there. Another veil, another habit, another pair of rosary beads, knotted but missing the crucifix, and with it a nameplate none of them recognized. Saint Revotia. No records, no feast day, no canonization, no history. But her icon appeared days later, painted in thick oil strokes, mounted above the choir loft. No artist was ever seen. Her face, blank, literally. No eyes, no mouth. Just flesh where features should be, and a single red dot in the center of her forehead, surrounded by a ring of salt. From that day on, the salt began to spread, slowly, grain by grain, across the chapel floor, in the dormitory windowsills, inside the shoes of red-veiled sisters, even across the pages of untouched Bibles. At first, it was dismissed as dust, or mold, or tricks of the candlelight, until Sister Euphemia coughed up an entire handful of it during evening mass. She had not eaten that day, nor spoken, only hummed, over and over, the 5th bell. When asked what she had seen, she looked past them, tears carving pale lines down her face, and whispered, "She's not a saint. She's what saints become when they're consumed. She remembers being many. Now she is one." After that, prayers began to change. Lines of old scripture altered subtly. Our Father became their vessel. Deliver us from evil became, make us ready for the hallowing. Sister Margaret began administering salt water during communion. Mother Catherine renamed the final nightly prayer, the benediction of the unhear, iled flesh. And then, on the night of a lunar eclipse, the 13th veil went missing. The glass case, intact. No sign of entry, but in its place was a single white feather. and on the floor beneath it, a perfect spiral of salt formed by no hand. Sister Lucia was the first to kneel inside it. She did not rise. She did not speak again. Her body calcified within hours, salt spreading up her spine, into her eyes, out through her fingertips. By morning, she was a statue, crystalline, weeping. But what came out of her eyes was not water. It was ink, dark, thick, familiar, enough to write one word across the chapel floor, soon. And the eye of Saint Revocia, once just a red dot on a painting, opened. Wide. April 23, 1859. It was the day the Mass bled backward. The chapel was full. All remaining sisters present, veils tight, eyes dull, lips stitched with obedience. No one knew why they were summoned, only that the bell had tolled 13 times before dawn, one toll for each sister taken. The air felt thick, not humid, not hot, heavy. Sister Margaret carried the chalice. Sister Elizabeth held the missal, upside down. Mother Catherine stood at the altar, arms spread, back turned, candles burned black. The crucifix had been removed. In its place, a mirror wrapped in rosary beads, each bead pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat. Then the Mass began, but not as they knew it. The Gloria was spoken first, then the Creed, then the Kyrie, backwards, word by word, phrase by phrase. And every syllable made the walls tighten, the ceiling press downward, the stone groan with memory. Sister Justine tried to leave, her feet fused to the floor. Sister Camilla cried silently as her voice sang lines she had never memorized, and behind them, on the stained glass windows, the saints wept ink, thick streams of it, down their painted cheeks, pooling on the sills. When it came time for the homily, Mother Catherine turned around. Her eyes were gone, only spirals where her pupils once lived. And her mouth had changed, widened somehow, split deeper on both sides like her cheeks had been peeled. She spoke with a dozen voices, layered, male, female, ageless, and none of them hers. Time is a curtain. We have torn it. All things holy shall be made hollow. We are what was. We are what never stopped becoming. You are the mouths. We are the voice. She raised her arms. The mirror behind her cracked, then shattered. And behind it, not a wall, not a hidden alcove, a tunnel, winding, crawling, made of ribs and ash. From it came light, not bright, pale, diseased, a curious, and a sound, like teeth grinding against glass. Then the altar began to bleed. Thick black fluid seeped from beneath it. The chalice overflowed, and the sisters began to chant without choosing to. Amen, Amen, Amen. Some collapsed, some levitated, some dissolved mid-sentence, their habits floating down like ash. But one remained standing. Sister Agnes returned. Silent, eyes glowing from within. She held something in her hands, not scripture, not relic. A bell, small, handheld, carved with her own name. She rang it, once, and time. Everything buckled. The candles reversed their melt. The ink crawled back up the windows. Spoken prayers sucked back into mouths, and for one moment, they were all themselves again. The pain, the joy, the memories, their names. And then the bell rang a second time, and it was all gone, except for one word scratched into the pulpit in blood. One left,